From Beyond Marketing, it's the 20-Minute Call, a podcast about the dreamers, boundary pushers, rebels, and champions of the skydiving industry. Each episode is a narrative journey highlighted by the highs, lows, and luck that the skydiving industry delivers, as told by the most influential people within the sport. If you've ever dreamed of becoming a skydiver, perhaps opening a drop zone, or becoming the next world champion, check out the 20-Minute Call hosted by me, James LeBarry. My guest today first came across my radar during the pandemic while binge-watching Conan O'Brien's podcast on YouTube. On the show, this woman with a very cool hairstyle was sharing her thoughts on how Conan would perform if he made a tandem skydive. The interview was hilariously funny as she sparred with Conan back and forth with her unassuming wit. Since that podcast, I've become friends with this intriguing woman who's been jumping for 11 years and serves as a tandem and AFF instructor in upstate New York. Her resume is filled with pursuits outside of the status quo, which include being a former roller derby competitor, college mascot for Canisius College, and occasionally performs as a drag king on the weekends. She's a brilliantly talented writer, and I'm proud to say she's my friend. Welcome to the 20-Minute Call podcast, Brittany Gray.
Hi, thank you. That's quite an introduction. I have a lot to live up to.
Oh, do you? I don't know. It just seems like that's who you are.
Well, thank you.
By the way, before we get started, I don't know if you know this, but you and I share something in common.
Oh, what is that?
I was also the mascot at my college.
Really?
I was.
Wow.
I was Rex, the lion.
Okay, so I was half a lion. I was Petey the griffin. So that's even more in common.
I don't know for those non-mascot people out there, I don't know if they know this, but it is 10,000 degrees in the mascot suit.
It is, and that also means that it's usually stinky because you're not the only person that's ever worn it. Mm-hmm. And overall, it's not. There's ups and downs, right?
Yeah, you know what I struggle with is I'm very vocal at basketball games, and when you got the big head on, no one can hear you, and I'm like screaming and yelling, and it was tough. It was a tough gig.
Yep.
Anyway, tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your background? Where are you originally from? What's your story?
Oh, wow. Okay, so I am from Buffalo, New York. I still live here, but I try to travel as much as possible because it's a fine place to live, but I don't want to be here all the time. Mm-hmm. And I have a long history in writing, and actually I used to want to be in comedy. And then I found myself working at a bank, and I ended up staying at the bank because as I got older, I realized that your job isn't what defines you. And as long as your job gives you the means to enjoy life, that's kind of where I settled. So that's how I got into all my other pursuits with the roller derby and I mean, mainly skydiving and all the other stuff that I do. I learned that hobbies define you more than your career does. It's different for everyone, but in my life, that's how it works.
You were interested in comedy writing. Tell us a little bit about that.
I was. So as a kid, it was Conan that kind of started it all. So it's like, I was probably 12, maybe even 10 or 11, the first time I saw him, which would have been very early on in his career too. And
when you
I don't know.
Saw him on TV or
on TV? I'm sorry. I have met him in person multiple times as well as the podcast. But yeah, I went to his show for my 16th birthday in New York because you have to be at least 16. And then I saw him at a college here. He came to speak. So I've actually met him in person a couple times. And then I also did the podcast.
When you did the podcast with him, bridge the gap. How did you even get on his podcast? Did he remember you? What was the deal?
He did not remember me, unfortunately, but
harsh.
I know. He did say I was funny, so I feel like that was all the validation I needed in my whole life. But actually, skydiving is what got me onto the podcast because he started interviewing people, with interesting hobbies or whatever. And I had heard one about someone that played roller derby, and I kind of made the connection. And I was like, well, it's the same as I play roller derby. That'd be like me being on the podcast. So he already done roller derby, so I had to find a different channel. And luckily I have multiple interesting hobbies. So I applied as a skydiving instructor. And then I think probably the icing on the cake is that there's very few women skydiving or tandem instructors. And so, yeah, pretty quickly after I applied, I was talking to Conan.
you must have been buzzing after that interview ended because he did say you were very funny.
He did. And, there's that part of me. So they do like a pre-interview where they ask you questions and just, kind of brief you on what it's going to be like. And I had mentioned that I wanted to write for him. So there's still always part of me that's like, well, someone probably told him that. So he was just being nice. But I like to believe that he really thought that I was funny. It's still to this day. And that was a few years ago now. When I think about it, I'm like, did that really happen? Like, that's crazy.
And he said that if he were to ever make a tandem skydive, he'd want to make it with you.
Yes, he did. He did. So I'm holding out hope there.
You held yourself very well on that interview. And for those that are listening here, I'm going to put the YouTube link in the show notes so people can go and see your cool hairstyle that I referenced, which you still rocking today, by the way.
I think I'll have it forever.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Tell us how you got into skydiving. What was the circumstance that you made your first jump?
Yeah, I had always wanted to fly. I mean, when I was younger, that was kind of an abstract thought. I just always wished that I could fly. When people say, oh, what superpower would you have? I would always choose flight or whatever. And then as I got older, I realized that skydiving was a thing. But as a teenager, $250 or whatever it is seems, where am I going to get that money from? So I kind of just shelved it. And then, well, plus you can't skydive until you're 18. But either way, I graduated college and I actually had a friend that had gone and he's like, oh, like I'll go again, come skydiving with me. And so I was like, I have money now, I'll go. And
where did you go?
That Western New York skydiving. Mm-hmm. And at the time they were in Akron. So this was, they're not even at that airport anymore, but, and I got married there too. But anyway, that's a story for later. On that first tandem, before I even landed, I was like, okay, this is my thing now. And going into it, I didn't know that you could be a skydiver. I think a lot of people don't realize that it's a whole world. I thought, obviously there's instructors, so they come from somewhere, but I don't think I realized that you could get a license and all of that. By the time the jump was over, I knew, and that was it.
You said that skydiving changed your life. How did it change it?
Wow, that's like this could be the whole podcast. It changed me as an individual. I think that, and this is going to be common, I would imagine, among a lot of skydivers, but the confidence that you get from skydiving and realizing how capable you are of things that you couldn't even imagine. It's stuff that's completely outside of the realm of normal human existence, and you're doing it every weekend, multiple times a day. And then I went on to become an instructor and to be a tandem instructor, which I never thought that I would do. And that is just a whole nother level of capability, and I also think, I mean, this is science, but like your brain slows down, and so in the rest of the world, everything slows down and all of a sudden everything's a lot easier. And in stressful situations, you handle it better. So just the way you move through the world changes. But then on top of that, I've traveled to places I would have never gone because of skydiving. Did you say like where? Like where? Yeah. Moab in Utah, which is, I mean, that's incredible. I went to a boogie on an island off of Panama. So that was incredible. The Pepe's Island Montana. Boogie. Yeah. Just all these places that I don't think they would have been on my list. And now they're my favorite places in the world. And then I met my husband also. So that's pretty life-changing.
You said that it gave you so much confidence. Were you not a confident person before, say, going into... Because you seem very self-assured to me.
Yeah, I am. And I always was. My mother made sure... She was not a confident person, so she made sure that my sister and I grew up confident. And she did a good job because I'm confident to a fault, probably. But I think it's hard. I was confident, but I think it's hard to put that confidence into practice until you've actually done things in the real world where you prove why you should be confident. And skydiving gave that to me. And it wasn't just physical confidence, it's emotional confidence too. And especially being a woman in the sport, there's so few of us. And I mean, I guess now at this point in my life, being a gender fluid person in the sport, which is even less, but you have to navigate it in a different way. And I met some people, and one of them ended up becoming my husband, that really taught me how to set boundaries and how to stand up for myself and how to live in a world that isn't always forgiving. That changes everything.
Are you I mean, why did you want to become a TI? I mean, it's not glamorous.
No, it's not. I didn't. Well, it's not that I didn't want to. I didn't think I could. I didn't think it was an option. I'm 5'3". I don't have a large stature. And when I started skydiving, I remember I would just go around and ask people, like, how do I want to be a professional skydiver. How do I do this? And I mean, knowing what I know now, there's a million different ways to do it. And, you know, I may have pursued competition or something, but at the time I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll get my AFF rating, but I'm not even interested in tandems. That's just not something I can do. And then about 5 years into jumping, part of it was that I was like, okay, what next? You know, I think a lot of skydivers get to that point where, okay, I've been doing the same jump for, 500 jumps, and I'm looking for something new. And I like instructing, and I like, actually more than instructing, I like learning. And getting those ratings was an opportunity to learn for me. Like, obviously I was going to be teaching people, but through doing that, I was going to learn things that I never would have learned as a fun jumper. And so that was very appealing to me. And I actually ended up getting my AFF rating and my tandem rating like 2 weeks apart. I went down to Z Hills, and then I came home, and then I went back and did the tandem rating. That is one of the things that I'm most proud of, just because of being small and, being a woman and not having it be something that was a natural progression for me. And yeah, once I decided to do it, I was excited about it. I actually worked out. I lifted weights for a year before going to get the rating, because I was like, I have to do something. There's no way I'm going to land these tandems, without putting some effort into it.
Did you have someone that you looked up to, another woman in the sport that was a TI, or anybody inspire you going like, wow, if she can do it, I can do this? What helped you get over the hump?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, I never thought about that. At the time, I didn't. I mean, I know a lot more female TIs now, but at the time, I did not know any. I think I was getting a lot of positive reinforcement from people at the drop zone. And men were telling me, oh, you can definitely do this. Like, you're strong. You have this, like, you can do it. And I think hearing them say that was just validation enough that I was like, okay. Plus, I had been in the sport for 5 years at that point. Again, I had gained a lot of confidence. And so I think by then I was like, yeah, I'll give it a try. I mean, I definitely was still hesitant and nervous, but I think in the back of my head, I knew that I'd do it.
Mm. Any, in your adventures, have there been any real memorable tandem students that you've jumped with?
At the last drop zone I was working at, there was a woman pilot. And I took her on, again, is sort of like being a woman tandem instructor. And I took her on her first tandem. So that was super special to have, a female TI, a female pilot doing that jump together. That was cool. I took my mom on a tandem. And then I actually took my sister on 2 tandems. And I ended up then being her AFF instructor. And then she now is in Arizona, just living life, jumping out of planes. And so that was cool.
Who is your sister?
Her name is Shelby Gray. She is also originally from Buffalo, and she kind of, was with me, and then she met a very nice man in Pennsylvania, and he was from Arizona, so they now live in Arizona, which breaks my heart, but I'm happy for her too.
And so she's jumping hard at Eloy, I guess.
They're actually in Buckeye.
Okay, yeah.
At Skydive Buckeye, but they do sometimes go over to Eloy too.
Very cool. I did not know that.
Yeah.
Huh. Any tandems that scared you?
2 come to mind.
Yeah.
I had one that I don't even really remember the conditions. I just know that when we got down under what would have been like the cloud layer, it was very turbulent, and I'm so small and light, and my passenger was light, and it was fine. But it was the most turbulence I've ever experienced under canopy, and it's hard because you can't react, with the student there, and we made it though. And then I also had a tandem that from the time we exited the plane, basically until we landed, she would just grab any part of my body, arms, legs, pieces of the rig that she could get her hands on. And so I spent the whole tandem
fighting her.
It was like a frog, like with sticky hands or something, it was the whole tandem, and we got it under control, but it was, I had a few moments.
I recall being more than one aircraft, but I remember very specifically being on a load where the tandem student was twice the size of the TI, and he had so much nervous energy that his his foot was like just going up and down. He was just sort of bouncing it so hard. And I thought, oh my gosh, like if this guy, I mean, he was just so nervous and he was so scared, but and yet you could see how strong he was, and it was sort of unaware. And I just thought, oh my God, like I would be stressed being the TI, just thinking, wow, I need to focus on the jump, but I know that this guy's going to be a lot of work, and sort of this dread before going out the door going, this is going to be a ride.
Yeah, I had someone like that who was actually very afraid of heights. And I got to give him credit because he did it and he did great. But like he was involuntarily shaking his whole body in the airplane. And I was like, oh, this could be fine or it could be interesting, you know? And he did great. But in the plane, you definitely have to find a way to separate yourself from the anxiety that the passenger is having.
Whew, better you than me. Brittany.
Yeah.
Yo, a quick break here to address the Drop Zone owners listening to the pod. If you're a DZO, then you know the insanity of taking your passion and making it your business. Why'd you do that? Running a DZ is hard. Between the stressors of liability, 30-day payment terms on fuel after 4 weeks of miserable weather, and angry staff who are convinced they've been skipped in the rotation, you need a tool that helps reduce your stress. Enter Burble software. All right. Conceived by a DZO who's been in the trenches just like you, Burble is the most sophisticated manifest and booking software on the planet. Your life as a DZO is hard enough, so don't be that DZO who tries to save a few bucks using software that wasn't built for us. Burble, the must-have drop zone management software for the 182DZ to the multi-turbine monster. Burble. Do you have any mentors aside? I know I mentioned about, TI women that you've looked to, but any mentors or people that really stand out or you admire in the sport today?
That's a good question. I would say I don't have like individual mentors, but I think that the atmospheres that I've been in have been my mentors, if that makes sense. Like, I think that I have gone through different phases in my skydiving career, and I've always been where I was supposed to be in that moment. So the drop zone I started at was a small drop zone. It's bigger now, but it was a small drop zone at the time, and it felt like family. It was just warm and it felt like home. And I think that's important when you're starting because, I mean, skydiving's great, but really the culture is what keeps people. And so I needed that. And that is what gave me the confidence to go out into the world and do what I did. And then, I sort of outgrew that situation and I started working at Sky's the Limit in Pennsylvania. And they also had a very warm family feeling, but it was also, there was something professional about it where I felt like, okay, I'm happy. I feel like I've accomplished something by working here and it feels good. And the people there were so welcoming to me. And so that taught me a lot about working in the sport. If I had to pick a person, I would probably pick Brom at Skydive Ratings. I just really admire him and I admire what he's done for the sport and what he's done for instructing. As I mentioned, instructing is really important to me. And so seeing the way that he approaches teaching and approaches, especially skydiving instructing, but instructing in general, I don't know. I've always really admired him.
My feeling with Brom, I don't know if you know Dario, who also works now with Brom, but yes. I feel that Brom and Dario and really the whole team there at Skydive Ratings are in it with you. Like they want you to be successful. Whereas I have seen folks going through ratings courses where it almost is like militant, like, this is your major test and hope it works out for you type thing. Yeah, I really do love his approach for sure. Yeah,
they just, like you said, but you don't realize it when you're going through the course, like they just take you in and they wrap you up in all their knowledge. And then you leave the course and all of a sudden, like you didn't have to it didn't feel like learning. Like it's almost like they just osmosis the stuff into your brain and your body. And I don't know. I just would love to have that ability.
And this podcast brought to you by Skydive Ratings.
Yeah.
Brittany, you've been outspoken about various social justice causes related to the LGBTQIA plus community, the Trevor Project, and recently Camp Unity. I'm pretty embedded in the skydiving community, but I was unaware of Camp Unity until recently, Can you just share with those listening, what is Camp Unity about?
So they disbanded probably about 2 years ago. But while we were around, we were really just trying to bring awareness to the sport and to make it more comfortable for the groups that generally are minorities in skydiving. It kind of morphed into more of an educational group for a while. They planned some seminars and we did some, I think we brought in like a diversity trainer, to do like a Zoom for everybody. And so while they were around, it was great. But it just ended up, it's hard to keep groups together, especially in skydiving, and it kind of fizzled. You mentioned earlier that you are transfluid, and I've known, you and I are friends, so I know this. And, coming into the podcast, I mentioned it before we came on live. I think it's important to have that conversation because it's a minority in the sport, and we're in such sort of a male-dominated type sport with lots of blind spots, right? Yeah. On the flip side, do I even want to chat with you about that, being transfluid? Because I'm not going on podcasts and they going, so you're a straight man? Tell us about that. It's sort of that balance. Do you get tired talking about your preferences, let's say? Okay, so that's a multi-tiered answer. So yes, but it's not a tired as in, I wish that I didn't have to answer this question. Mm-hmm. Because I think that it is important. If someone, it depends on how they're asking and who is asking. If they're asking genuinely to understand, and I know that describing or explaining things to them is going to better how they interact with people in the world, then I will talk all day about, whatever questions they have. I mean, it wears on you, right? In the activist and advocacy world, there's a belief that the marginalized group shouldn't have to do the education because we're already just fighting to exist, right? So I shouldn't also have to make my existence easier for you. But if somebody is asking me genuinely to understand, maybe their child or a friend that they have, or they just want to know more for themselves, I know I love talking. I actually love talking about being queer. Mm. So we could do the whole podcast on that if you wanted. Like I said, it just depends on who's asking. And if the questions are shallow or superfluous or, not maybe with the best intent, then I don't have time for that. Mm. But if you're just trying to be educated, then I'm all right with it. Yeah, I think I'm trying to have empathy because I'm just living my life. Mm-hmm. I'm not having to stop and talk about aspects of my personal life or my interests or how I identify or anything like that. And I just think, man, that is got to be sort of burdensome. And I think part of my commentary is coming from, I am a straight white male. So I have a lot of blind spots myself, but I also don't care. And when I say don't care, like with how you identify or what your interests are, I'm great with it. I almost feel that it's a shame that it has to be a conversation. Yeah. I imagine that the community feels that way as well. Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because it would be amazing if everybody could just, if I didn't have to carry around that mantle all of the time, oh, look at me, I'm whatever I am, whatever your identity is. But at the same time, the necessity for doing that has created a culture and a community that is beautiful. And so the fact that it is always on our sleeve or, it is always something that we have to claim and defend, on one hand, that's exhausting and it's not fair. But on the other hand, my favorite place to be is around queer people. And that's because we have this culture that's been born of the necessity to have that be such an active part of our identity. If there was no default, right? Like straight and hetero or straight and cisgender is the default, which is, fine. But it would be nice if there just wasn't a default. And so you never had to, and nobody had to explain anything. What are the blind spots that occur at a drop zone? Let's say, I, as the straight white male, I'm there. As my awareness levels or empathy and sensitivity has increased towards marginalized folks who hear or, there's just so many certain sort of expressions in the lexicon that might make people feel a certain way that I don't even think about. Yeah. So what are the blind spots that you might typically see at a drop zone, either in our culture or the behavior that maybe people are not aware of, but maybe should be more sensitive to? Well, there's a lot of them, but the ones off the top of my head, I know, honestly, as a queer person, I have not experienced as much, but I don't think that's a good thing. I think the reason that I haven't is because it's so far overlooked that it just isn't. I think that most people it just doesn't even exist to them, but not in the way that you're saying, like in the way that it's just not a thing, which isn't good. I think I've experienced them more as an AFAB person or, a woman, because I think that skydivers a lot of time will, actually, I've seen it more directed at my sister because she's a very feminine presenting woman. And, a lot of possibly unwanted attention, sometimes to the point of it feeling scary, depending on the situation you're in. This idea that women skydivers don't know as much or need, and it's never, well, sometimes it is, but it's not usually blatant. Someone's not coming out and saying, oh, well, you're a woman, so you don't know this. It's just like the over-explaining of things, or other instructors coming in and taking over a first jump course, or if you're working with a student and they think they know better than you, but really they're wrong. And, things like that happens. And then, I can't speak for people of color, but I have read accounts from people of color that a lot of the time skydivers will just, if they see a person of color at the drop zone, they'll assume they're a tandem, which that's a huge problem, obviously. And I think that probably happens with women too, where, there's so few women in the sport and there's all of these stereotypes in people's heads that they're just like, oh, that's probably not a licensed skydiver, And so it's all these things that are definitely more passive, or maybe just people don't even realize they're doing it. But to the person that it's happening to, it's huge. It's a huge problem.
I know the volume at USPA, certainly, Melissa Nelson is very much driving this initiative of all the feedback that she's hearing from women in the sport. And
yep.
I think she would admit to being a little bit unaware of it because she didn't experience it being, like you were on notice if you mess with Melissa Nelson from her dad. Right. But, she's hearing that, whoa, this is a real problem. Mm-hmm. In the sport. From your perspective, what needs to change, or how do we educate better? Because, like most people in the sport are good people, but if they're just unaware or lacking empathy, like,
yeah,
what can we do?
I think the biggest thing, and this touches on what I was saying earlier about the burden of education shouldn't be on the people who are being marginalized. I think that, especially men and white men and straight white men at drop zones need to be vocal. Like, we need active allies. And I think the skydiving culture, in my opinion, is very, I don't want to use the word complacent, but I think people are hesitant to rock the boat in skydiving because it's often the only place that someone feels at home. It's often the only place that's like people's happy place. There's also a lot of the times a culture of, fitting in and wanting to be part of, like, you got to be cool and all of that. And so I think it's very hard for allies to feel comfortable having a voice, but that's how change is going to happen. Women have been in the sport since the beginning, and there hasn't been a ton of progress, and so obviously it's not women that are going to be able to change that. I don't want to take agency away from women. For sure, women can change it by just existing and continuing to do what we do, but it's going to change a lot faster if we could have some more vocal allies. It's the same thing when you're doing racial activism, racial justice activism. White people listen to white people, and so you need white people to stand up. It's the same thing. Men listen to men. You need men to stand up and speak out. Not to get political, but the country is so divided, right? Either with your politics that we've really stopped listening. Yeah. And I was excited to talk to you and to talk to you about this topic today, because it's like, how can I, with my privilege, be a better ally to whether it be women or the LGBTQIA plus community? There's a balance there, right? Where, hey, people just go to the drop zone to get away from our burdens or the things that we're reading in the news or socio-political issues. Like, you're in a jumpsuit, cool with me. Yep. Of course, we do bring our own prejudices wherever we go. But, what does it look like for me to support
Brittany, how can I support? I mean, I'm hoping that I ask this question in hopes that those listening may be able to learn as well. You know, is it just posting, hey, I stand with my brothers and sisters, you know, in the sport or in this life? At the same time, don't want to look like pandering or anything like that. You know, I want it to be so sincere and real. What works? What would be the best way?
Yeah, that's an important question. And honestly, just you asking the question is a huge first step. So, I mean, and this is, you know, going out, like you said, to people listening, but that right there is the first step to being a good ally. But then, like you said, the listening piece, if you're going to ask that question, you have to be ready to listen, and then you have to be open to what the person's going to say. So if you're not ready to hear the answer to that question, don't ask it. The two big things are listening. So listen to what these people need, whether it's a woman or, you know, a person of color or a person from the LGBTQ plus community. They know what they need. Like, you don't know better than them what they need. So ask them what they want from you. And it's going to be different for everybody. Some people just want to fly under the radar. They don't want to be outed. They don't want to have to fight at the drop zone. And so if that's the case, probably what they want is just support from you. They want to know that you're there. They want that emotional support. On the other hand, there are people that, you know, like me, who go to the drop zone, and I'm on a crusade. You know, if someone's going to say things that it's inappropriate, I'm going to speak out. And in that case, the best way to be an ally is I was at an event yesterday and I heard it explained this way. If you're going to be a good ally, you have to be willing to take the hits for me. Mm. So I'm taking hits my whole life, right? Every day is dealing with some kind, whether it's emotional or, I mean, in some places physical. I am always queer. I am always a woman. So I am always existing in that space where I feel under some type of pressure. A good ally is going to step in and take that off of that person. They're going to speak up if there's a joke that is made at the drop zone. They're going to speak up if someone dismisses a woman instructor, you know, and they're actually good. You don't have to be mean about it. That person might just not know, but you have to be willing to educate people for me.
One thing that strikes me, Brittany, is just in general, to be courageous. Well, I'm gonna channel some Brene Brown here. Okay. To be courageous is to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And to be vulnerable, to be so open, in your case with being comfortable in saying right out of the top of the podcast with your identity as a person, that's scary because there comes judgment. You don't know if somebody's cool with it, or maybe someone is just like they just can't get their head around it. What gives you, like, make me understand where that confidence comes from to allow yourself to be so vulnerable, because I don't know that I would be this so courageous.
Yeah, well, first, thank you for that. I think it comes from necessity for me. So I actually wasn't out for a long time. I was so not out that I didn't know for a long time. So all through high school, I wasn't out. In college, I was out, but not really. And it's actually only in the last few years that I am out in the way that you're describing. And I think it's a few things. I have a very good friend that I've known since I started college that is also part of the queer community. And so there's a lot of strength in that. And also my husband, who, it's funny because he's a straight white guy, but he's like given me so much strength in accepting me. Like, he accepts me, and that has given me the courage to, as long as I have him, I'm good, you know? So that's given me a lot of the courage to be who I am. But then also I do a lot of, like you mentioned in the beginning, I do a lot of activism myself. The more that I have immersed myself in the LGBTQ community and participated in the fight and the work and all of that, I see the value in being visible. I think part of the reason that I took so long to come out is because I didn't have an elder queer, we call them like elder, like an older person to look up to and say, oh, it's okay. You know, I didn't have that as a young person. So I understand the value of having someone to look to. And so I think a lot of it comes from my desire to be that for other people. Mm-hmm. You know, I know how important that is. And also I'm sick of living quietly. So it's just, I think you reach a certain age where you're like, I'm just who I am, and it is what it is.
This podcast is sponsored by Beyond Marketing, the digital marketing agency for the skydiving industry. As avid podcast consumers ourselves, we're not fans of ads during a podcast, so we'll spare you the details about why we love building websites and helping businesses show up in Google search results. But just know this, we're passionate about the skydiving industry and how it markets itself. Look us up at dropzone.marketing. Again, that's dropzone.marketing. I don't want to discount anyone that's listening to this, who might be closeted or not closeted, but closeted at the drop zone.
Yeah.
You are the person that you haven't had, right? So what would you say to those folks that are listening that are relieved going, oh man, Brittany understands. Is there any, I don't know that you need to give advice, but is there any word that you would want to share for those that are struggling like maybe you once did?
Yeah. I would say the drop zone is a scary place. Depending on the drop zone, it is a scary place to be out for multiple reasons that we've already talked about, but it is your happy place, and it is a mixed bag of people and you don't know what you're going to get. And so the drop zone actually is one of the last places that I was out, really, really out, because I was just afraid. And that's also okay. And the number one thing that you need to do is protect yourself and protect your own mental health. And so if you're never going to come out at the drop zone, that's fine. But if you want to, there are a lot of us. Mm-hmm. It doesn't feel like there are, but there are.
Have you been surprised by how many queer folks are in skydiving?
More recently. So when I first started skydiving, I did not know of any, which is part of the reason that I wasn't out. And then I did meet, this was probably 5 or 6 years into jumping, I met one. And then a couple years later, I learned that one of my friends was bisexual or is bisexual. And so that was 2. And then after that, I did start, once I was more out, I think probably part of it is that I was looking for it more in a different way. You attract what you are, right? So I think that is probably why I noticed more. But yeah, I think we're on the rise, or at least us being out is on the rise. So it is out there, and there are drop zones that are very, very safe for LGBTQ people, depending on where you are and depending on the culture. I think, I don't want to say which drop zone it is because I don't know for sure, but one of the drop zones in California does a boogie. I think it's called the Rainbow Boogie, and it's for the LGBTQ community. Mm-hmm. So it's there. It's just take your time and find the right place and the right people. And once you do that, you at least have like your safe home,
I imagine that when you come out, particularly, certainly in general and at the drop zone, it must feel like this huge weight lifted.
Yeah, you become who you always were inside. And that, as scary as it can be, I mean, sometimes there's been times where, especially now that I do drag, I found myself outside in drag. I'm not in a queer space, or I'm not somewhere that I feel safe. And it's terrifying. Like it can be very scary. Even at Pride, I go to New York to do Pride every year, and it's the most amazing experience of my life, but it's still scary. You don't know, there's variables, right? That fear and that risk, to me at least, is worth the joy. That there's nothing like the joy of living your truth. And, we put up with things to be able to do that. But yeah.
Yeah, Brittany, I can't express to you how much I'm appreciative of this conversation, because there's this balance as someone who wants to be an ally, but at the same time doesn't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable in having it be the topic, because it's so personal.
Yeah. But
with you, I feel very safe, which is, ironic that the straight white male here has to feel safe, but just because I want to learn more. I want to be better educated, and I want to be able to have that open and honest conversation. And while this is a podcast around the people of skydiving, it's who the people of skydiving are that fascinates me far more than, any world record that has been made, as interesting as that might be. We are definitely starting to see what we used to read about in the world, never penetrating drop zones. And now the conversations are happening, at the DZ, which I think is entirely healthy, because my feeling as someone that was bullied young is I want everyone to feel comfortable.
Well, yeah, and that's what the drop zone is supposed to be. Like, skydiving is a counterculture, and the counterculture is usually where people who don't fit in the mainstream culture go to feel comfortable, and that should translate to everybody, right? Like, that should translate to whoever you are. You should be able to feel comfortable, and I always have thought that, you kind of alluded to this, but skydiving is always a little bit behind whatever the main culture is doing, and I guess that makes sense as a counterculture, but we are starting to see changes, and I've been very impressed with what I've seen. And I love Gen Z. Like, I love Gen Z because I think that are we allowed to swear on this podcast?
Yes, we are.
Okay, I figured, but like, they're not taking any shit, and they have a vision for the future, and they are who they are, and they accept people. And I think that's part of what's happened at drop zones that you're talking about, is there's an influx of these younger people that they're going to live their lives, whether it's at the drop zone or it's at work or wherever it is. And so that is very nice to see. But it's also like this, like I have never had a conversation in skydiving like this,
Really?
other than, like with my husband or, yeah, like I've never had a platform to talk like this within skydiving. So the fact that you're putting this out there, like, this is how change happens.
Well, that makes me happy to hear. I can only tell you, Brittany, that I look up to you. You inspire me, because it is easy for people like me that has a small platform anyway to say what everyone thinks. That's easy, but to stand out and be confident and comfortable and put it out there, and then how's it going to be received?
Yep.
and be okay with rolling how it's going to be perceived, because I look at that as great courage, because for myself, I care what people think about me. Mm-hmm. I'm not so cool to say that I don't care. I do care. In my concerns of how people judge me, I keep things close to my chest, whether it be my politics or, that's a great start, even with my politics. Right. It may not agree with some people. Brittany, I'm so appreciative of you educating our audience, certainly me. And for me, my takeaway here is, how can I be a better ally to my brothers and sisters that are just trying to live their lives and be themselves? It's not that hard.
Right?
So what's next for you?
Oh,
what are you looking forward to? What are your goals?
Are you talking about in general or in skydiving, or both?
Both.
Both. All right. We'll start with skydiving. Since the pandemic has been a bit of a roller coaster for myself and my husband, we were jumping in Pennsylvania. That drop zone is going through a bit of a transition, so we lost that outlet. We do try to... basically, it comes down to we're having a hard time finding like a home. And so skydiving, which has been, an enormous part of both of our lives for, like you said, 11 years, has suddenly become difficult, and this is unprecedented in our lives and our relationship. And I went through a period where I was like, okay, like, that's fine, we'll figure it out. And now I'm like aching for it. So I think we're trying to come up with a plan. So I think that as far as skydiving goes, what's next is to really be very intentional about finding places to jump, setting time aside, and like making it a priority, as difficult as it is for us right now to do that, because we just can't not do it. So that is the next thing, is putting that puzzle back together. And then in my life, that's a huge question. I don't know. I'm very focused on drag right now, so that's kind of my thing. I'd like to expand my reach there, and just experiencing new things. I'm always taking in new things and seeing if I like them, and either setting them aside or keeping them. And I got to get all the adventure in before I can't do it anymore. Mm-hmm.
Tell me, just to key off of drag and your I don't know if the right way of saying this is your character.
Sure, that works.
Is Freddie Hercury?
That's right.
So, and you said that works. What is the correct way of saying that?
I think that I don't really even, some people say persona, character, some people say, I don't know that there is actually a specific word for it. So character works.
So the enjoyment you get out, is it more out of the performance, or, is it just like being on stage in any theater? Is that the joy that you get from that performance, or is there more?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's both. So as we talked about, I wanted to go into comedy when I was younger, and that never left. I got distracted by skydiving for many, many years, but that need or desire to be a performer or some kind of artist never went away. And I think that I had kind of given up on it. I was like, I'm in my 30s now. I'm not going to start a career in comedy. But when drag came along, I was like, oh, okay, I can be funny. I can have a stage presence. I can go out there and entertain and get fulfillment that way. And so that is a huge part of it for me. It's a huge high, and it's just kind of an integral part of who I am. But then, of course, there's the gender aspect of it and the euphoria and all of that comes with it. So it's kind of the best of both worlds.
So interesting. Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, Brittany, I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Me too.
And for those that may not be aware, you do quite a bit of writing for us here at Beyond Marketing, and you are brilliant. You are an outstanding writer, and I'm so appreciative that we get to work with you.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you. Writing for you is one of my favorite things. It's been like a dream come true for me. I just love it. So. Oh,
man. Well, that makes me feel great because you're so good at it. We could gush. We could gush on further.
Yeah.
Brittany Gray, thank you so much. And I don't know why I always have to say your full name. Brittany Gray.
No, I like it. It makes me sound very important. So keep doing it.
Brittany Gray, thank you so much for joining me today on the show.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Have a super day.
You too.
Thanks so much for listening to the 20-Minute Call podcast. Please do follow us on your podcast app so you always have the latest episode downloaded. And leave a review if you really enjoyed the episode. If you want to contact the team, our email address is info@beyondmarketing.xyz. This episode was edited and engineered by Garnet Znydrick of the YouTube channel Blue Skies, Fun Days. Thanks for listening, and join us in 2 weeks for our next episode.